an interesting skill set of how you accept and how you don't. And so I don't know anybody who's very good at this, quite frankly. I mean, I'd welcome your point about the two offices next to each other, but I'd welcome knowing who actually prides themselves on being able to winnow out the potentially deceptive or at least inaccurate information quickly.
I agree with you, Lynn. I also think two things. Number one, going back to that Haiti example, I think that was a good example at a small micro level of many disparate organizations working together. I think to answer your question, the best solution often comes from an aggregate of the most dispersed perspectives. The problem in that is coordination and cultivation of all the different opinions and then sort of having somebody in the middle. The best way to do that is when you can get the problem down to the smallest sort of identifiable end state, i.e. this is crowded around, finding this person. So you bring those other people in who you may not get along with, but at some point, the collective group, and there's a mission, guys, people get excited about doing this, and pretty soon the law enforcement folks bring their data to the table, and then the other folks bring their data, and pretty soon, it's almost like where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? You start, querying all sorts of stuff, and everybody comes to the table. And so my answer to you is one of trying to articulate what your end state is in such a small area, and then build around that a diversified group of people that you trust. And maybe that's through a wiki page or something, but people can rally around something they understand and believe in, and maybe whatever problem you're chasing down, once you get that quantified, they'll come to the table. There's a website called, I think it's To Catch a Rat. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. I think it's since been taken down. It was run by a lot of I don't know if that's down or not, but it was run by a lot of the organized crime people up in New England. If you can't tell, I'm from Boston, and the whole point of the website was if you knew a guy that was ratting, an informant, put his picture up. Okay? Well, that doesn't help all those good guys, but if you're on the bad side, that helps you a lot. That's a good example. I mean, you had people posting things up about all these other people. So I guess in this particular instance, if you really want to build a lethal, agile force, keep the goal in mind, defined, small, and bring in passionate people.
One of the things that I found very useful is if you're in a position of some kind of authority over a certain area. So in my case, it was the Internal Revenue Service and network security. If you get your name out there enough, what will happen is if somebody wants to report something, finding who to report it to is always the first problem an informant will have. Who do I call? So if they do a query for IRS or Internal Revenue Service special agent, back then my name would probably bubble up to the number one. So I got a huge amount of information from that. And when we started getting hit with the phishing, I was the one that came up with the idea of why don't we create phishing at irs.gov. Now today everybody does that, but way back then there was no other federal agency doing something like that. There's a ton of data that people forward to phishing at irs.gov, and sometimes they get asked, why did you send this to us? It doesn't have anything to do with IRS. And they'll say, well, because I didn't know where else to send it. So it's very, very important if you're in a position where you want to cultivate information, you have to put yourself in a position of some third party that has no knowledge of you or your organization. How would they find you? If they had information, how easy would it be to get it to your organization? And that actually turns out to be pretty important.
There's actually another model. If you're actually just starting up, if you can recruit directly yourself. There's a man here in Las Vegas named Jeff Jonas. Some of you have seen him on the IBM ads. But he started a company that focused on something called non-obvious relationship analysis. And so imagine when and he was working with the gaming industry. So instead of having somebody send in their paper records and have somebody process them, he would say, all right, bring the following records to the center, to the hiring center today, and have this information. And it would, so you bring the last 5 years of residence. So when you type in, it would say, when you type in 123, River Terrace, it knows right away that that's an apartment house. And so it doesn't let you get further without putting the apartment number in. And it has various algorithms for checking social security numbers. So if you transpose a digit, there are ways to cross that, reference that against your name. But then it lets the companies ask questions like, the phone number you listed for yourself 5 years ago is the same phone number as a known card shark. Or ask questions like, how many people in the purchasing department have personal relationships with vendors? And actually, one of the companies here went through it and they found that over 100 people in the purchasing department had personal relationships with vendors, and 17 were vendors. They were buying from themselves. And so if you have something targeted like that, and he's done some very interesting work with something called data hygiene, which is, for example, they've taken all 128 spellings of Muhammad and normalized them so that whether it's spelled, M-M-E-D or M-E-D or with an H or things like that, they can figure out this is the same person. So there's actually been some very good work done in the private sector in this that might be applicable to what we're talking about.
I was glad to hear John kind of talking about passionate people, because heaven knows there are a lot of passionate people here in Las Vegas, but they're not all patriots. And as far as passionate, brilliant, and patriotic people, one thing I'd like to leave with you is 2 URLs if I can. The first one is NC4, and the second one, well, actually I'm going to leave you 3. Another one, the second one is all.net. Belongs to a friend of mine by the name of Fred Cohen. Fred did the original research on computer viruses back in 1984 for his PhD at the University of Southern California. Very interesting guy. I met him when I met him online. I didn't meet him online, I just saw a website and it said 50 ways to hack the World Wide Web, and I thought I need to get to know who this guy is. And this was in the mid-90s. And so I did a little collaboration with Fred, and he invited me to put on some of our training programs out at Sandia National Labs in Livermore, California. And we were putting on a data mining training program for the Department of Treasury. It was the first one. And I wanted to hand something out to my students. And I kind of used that 50 ways model that Fred had. So I drafted 50 or 20 items on what I call 50 ways to protect your information assets while surfing the internet. And I put 20 in, and 15 minutes later, Fred sent 30 back, and it's still sitting out there if you want to take a look at it. And I'd be interested in some pushback from those of you, because it's interesting how many of those 50 items are still relevant today. It's called 50 Ways to Protect Your Information Assets While Surfing the Internet. And the last one is Project Vigilant, PROJECTVIGILANT.US. And I would urge you to take a look at that site if you are interested in this whole issue of attribution. An incredible team of people that's been pulled together on a volunteer basis, and if you're interested in that, I'd be glad to talk to you offline. I'd be glad to introduce you to the fellow who is really the genius behind this. His name is Chet Uber, U-B-E-R.
Thanks, Kevin. To echo what Lynn had said in terms of getting all this disparate information and what's non-obvious actually being relevant, if you look at things in, again, to use the term full spectrum, physical and virtual, I mean, if I'm going after a person and I have a virtual entity going after him with some particular thread, maybe I sent the fashion guy after him because I know that this person is into fashion, and then I coupled that with a Formula One persona, and I coupled that with a business acumen that person might be interested in. And then, oh, by the way, I was able to get his speed pass or his fast pass on the freeway there, so when you go through the toll. Now I'm really bringing in all sorts of different aspects to this equation. I'm bringing a cyber piece, but I'm also bringing a physical piece. I'm getting a pattern of life when this guy drives, and maybe there's some geo-fencing going on, so with his cell phone, etc. So there's all different levels to look at this, and I think the key to come up with the best solution is if you can get a bunch of different practitioners from different backgrounds together, and those being non-obvious, as Lynn said, and they work towards a common goal, you'd be very surprised at what come out, what transpires. I run innovation drills for companies and things, and when I pull the the mom that runs a cupcake factory in, with the guy that's a carpenter in, with the advanced programmer that never leaves his basement, you get some really interesting discourse going on. But in the end, you get a really interesting end state that I just don't think would have arrived there if you brought 15 SEALs in a room or 15 law enforcement people. We are entering the world where it's no longer a-dimensional expertise. We are entering a world where the most valuable people are those that maybe are jacks of all trades, obviously masters of none, but they have enough competency to know when a different capability. So I would just ask you guys to keep that in mind. Gone are the days of straight, single dimensional expertise, and enter the days of when I can bring people in that have many different perspectives on things.
So one of the other things I think is worth mentioning is that when we do get informants, it's very, very important at some point to do some kind of cursory monitoring. I remember about 20 years ago a problem in Central Florida where there was a couple fires. And it later was found that one of the volunteer firemen was setting them because he wanted to be able to be first on the scene and talk to people about how he put the fire out. We have seen in the past where informants have gone overboard after the initial information they wanted to relay was handled, everything was done. They kind of wanted to stay doing the stuff. So they'll start coming back with more and more information, but you have to make sure that they're not in the process of generating some of this work that they're reporting. And I've had conversations with other law enforcement agents that have said that their informant went out and started soliciting people to do stuff so he could turn around and report it and make money. And I think I said that the paid informants are probably the sleaziest and the ones that really have to be watched the most. Yes, sir.
You've talked a great deal about trusting informants, and I'd like to reverse the equation. I do breach investigations in California, and that's what I've been doing for the last few years. I'm a licensed investigator, and in Silicon Valley mostly, and you'll be hard-pressed to find a more paranoid group of people than Silicon Valley executives. There have been many times I've recommended they talk to the government. They advise them of what's happened. They try to keep it a secret, and there usually ensues a discussion in a room about why should we trust those people. Many of the people that I work with are from my generation or a bit older, and they grew up during COINTELPRO when the federal government was pulling dirty tricks on ordinary Americans, illegal surveillance, getting them to lose their jobs because they said something that they thought was subversive at a PTA meeting. So that's one thing that impacts people. I've heard stories about how they'll turn it around and leak it, and they're full of the feds are riddled with rogues and leaks, and they can't get any internal, or they can't get any international informants because they keep getting them killed or arrested. Why should they trust you?
So the real question is, why do they trust law enforcement to come forth with information? I've not been in an arena where that has been a problem, but I can tell you that when you look at, say, banking industry or large corporations that have had internal problems and have a reluctance to report them because of publicity, there are some ways that it can be delicately handled. There have been arrangements made with people that came forward that said, listen, we're one of many that these people are hitting. We can't press charges because it'll ruin our reputation, but we still want to give you the information. And we've actually had a lot of people come forth with that kind of information. The problem, however, is that for everybody that's a victim